The wager was made at White's, over the third bottle, on a wet Tuesday in October, and like most of the cruelties that pass for sport among idle men, it began as a joke and ended as a thing that could not be taken back. It was Lord Falbridge who proposed it. He was a man of perhaps 40, florid and rich and bored in the particular way of men who have never once been refused anything, and he had been needling the Duke of Wrenmoor for the better part of an hour about the new governess. "They tell me," said Falbridge, swirling his claret, "that you have engaged a perfect tartar for those motherless nieces of yours. A frosty little nobody who will not laugh, will not flatter, will not so much as raise her eyes to a gentleman above her station. The whole of Mayfair is talking of it. The governess who looks at a duke as though he were a tradesman come to the wrong door." He smiled, showing his teeth. "Tell me, Wrenmoor, does it not gall you to be made nothing in your own house by a girl you pay £40 a year?" The Duke of Wrenmoor did not answer at once. He was younger than Falbridge by a dozen years, dark and spare and contained, with a cold, handsome face that gave away nothing, and gray eyes that gave away less. He had taken the guardianship of his late brother's 2 small daughters the previous spring, along with the title and the debts and the great echoing house on Grosvenor Square, and he had discovered in himself no aptitude whatever for any of it. The children unsettled him, the house oppressed him, and the governess he could not account for at all. "She does her work," he said. "I have no complaint of her." "No complaint?" Falbridge laughed. "Listen to the man. Wrenmoor, she has cowed you. You who broke Carlisle at piquet and took La Rochelle's mistress and his matched greys in a single season, brought low by a spinster in grey serge. I'd not have believed it." He leaned back. "I'll tell you what. I have 100 guineas says you cannot do it. Cannot bring her round, cannot make that cold, proud creature warm to you, soften to you, look at you the way women look at you, in a week, 7 days, a duke's whole charm against a governess's starch. What do you say? Or has the great Wrenmoor lost his nerve along with his manners?" It was a contemptible thing to propose, and the Duke knew it was contemptible, and he was 3 bottles in and stung and weary of being laughed at. And so he did the contemptible thing, as men of his world had been doing to women of hers since the world began. "A week," he said. "Done." They shook on it. The other men at the table laughed and made their side bets and wrote it in the betting book in the careless hand of men recording a horse race, and not one of them thought to wonder what the governess might have to say about being the horse. That was rather the point of her. A governess was a piece of furniture that could read Latin. She was there to be useful and invisible, to be neither servant nor family nor guest, but some bloodless thing in between. And the one thing she was never, under any circumstances, permitted to be, was a person with a will of her own that a gentleman was bound to respect. The Duke of Wrenmoor went home that night well pleased with himself. By Sunday he would understand exactly what he had done, and the understanding would cost him 100 guineas, and his pride, and, though he did not yet suspect he had one to lose, his heart. But that is to run ahead of the story. On the wet Tuesday it began. The Duke knew only that he had made an easy wager against a friend, and that the woman in grey serge who would not meet his eyes did not stand the slightest chance against him. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. The opening of the story, if it has an opening before the wager, is a cold one, and it belongs to the children, and it is worth the telling, for it explains everything that came after. Augusta and Mary Wrenmoor had been, 8 months before, the cherished daughters of a warm and unremarkable household, not a grand one. Their father had been a younger son, with a modest house in the country, and a modest income and a wife he adored, and 2 little girls he carried on his shoulders through the orchard in summer. And then, on a wet night in March, on a dark road, the carriage had gone over, and in the space of a single instant the warm, unremarkable household had ceased to exist, and the 2 little girls had become that most pitiable and inconvenient of things, orphans with a claim on people who did not want them. They had been passed along a chain of relations, each more reluctant than the last. A great-aunt who found them too loud, a cousin who found them too quiet, a second cousin who kept them 3 weeks and returned them like ill-fitting gloves. At each house they learned the same lesson a little more deeply, that they were a burden, that affection was conditional and brief, that the safest thing was to take up as little room as possible and expect nothing, because expecting things led only to the particular cold ache of not receiving them. Augusta's stammer dated from this period. Mary's silence dated from this period. They were not born frightened children. They were made into frightened children with great efficiency by a succession of adults who could not be troubled to love them. And then the title had passed, through a series of deaths that need not detain us, to their father's coldest relation, the Duke of Wrenmoor, who took them not from any wish to but because the lawyers told him he must, and who installed them in his great house on Grosvenor Square and a governess to mind them, and then forgot them as thoroughly as a man forgets an umbrella left at a club. So that when Charlotte Hale arrived on a gray afternoon in June to take up her post, she found 2 small girls who had perfected the art of being no trouble, who flinched when she raised her voice and flinched worse when she lowered it kindly, who had learned to read an adult's mood the way sailors read weather for survival, and who expected from their new governess precisely what they had received from everyone since March: indifference at best, and impermanence for certain. What they got instead was Charlotte. She had seen children like this before. She had, in a sense, been a child like this, in the cold years after her mother died. And she knew that there was only one cure, and that it was slow, and that it could not be hurried or faked, for these were children who could detect a fraud at 40 paces. So she simply began. She learned their names and the right way to say them. She found out that Augusta loved facts and Mary loved stories, and she supplied both, daily, without stint. She did not flinch when they flinched. She was the same on the bad days as the good. She let them test her, and they tested her, in the way wounded children do, with small cruelties and sudden withdrawals and midnight terrors, daring her to prove that she too would tire of them, and she did not tire of them, would not tire of them, was visibly, reliably, boringly there, morning after morning, until the testing slowly exhausted itself against the fact of her constancy, and the children began, tentatively, disbelievingly, to hope. By October, by the week the wager began, Augusta could get through a whole afternoon without a stammer, and Mary had begun to speak again, a little, to Charlotte in the safe hours after dark, and the 2 of them had built, with their governess, in the cold, indifferent house of an uncle who barely knew their faces, a small, warm country of 3 souls, with its own customs and stories and jokes, a country with a population of 3, and a flag of nobodies and a constitution that consisted entirely of the proposition that here, at least, in this room, you were safe, and you were wanted, and no one would tire of you. This was the thing the Duke of Wrenmoor saw when he stood in the corridor on the 3rd night and looked through the gap in the door. This was the thing he had wagered he could disrupt for sport. And this is why, when he understood what he had done, it broke something in him that no mere guilt could have broken. For he had not merely insulted a proud woman, he had gambled idly over a glass of claret with the one fragile, precious thing 2 devastated children had managed to build out of the wreckage of their whole world, and he had very nearly, for 100 guineas and the laughter of fools, brought it down on their heads. A man may forgive himself a great many sins. That one, the Duke found, he could not forgive at all, and the not forgiving was the beginning of his becoming worthy of forgiveness, though it would be some weeks before he understood the difference. Miss Charlotte Hale had been governess at Wrenmoor House for 4 months, and in that time she had formed a number of opinions, which she kept, as a governess must, entirely to herself. She was 27, slight and straight-backed, with dark hair drawn plainly back and clear gray eyes that missed very little and revealed less. She had not always been a governess. She had been, until she was 20, the daughter of a clergyman scholar with a fine library and no money, and she had been educated far past what was useful to a woman in her station: Latin, Greek, history, mathematics. A head full of furniture her father had given her in place of the dowry he could not. When he died, she had discovered, as such daughters do, that a furnished mind is worth precisely nothing in the marriage market, and a great deal less than nothing in the eyes of the families who hire governesses, who want a woman learned enough to teach but cowed enough to know her place, and are forever uneasy when they find they have got the first without the second. Charlotte knew her place. She simply declined to be afraid of it. There was a difference, and it was the difference that unsettled people, and she had long since stopped trying to explain it. The two little girls were the whole of her comfort in that cold house. Augusta was 8 and grave and watchful, with a stammer that came on when she was frightened, which was often. Little Mary was 5, and had stopped speaking almost entirely in the months since their parents' deaths, and clung to Charlotte's skirts with a silent desperation that broke the governess's heart anew each morning. They had been handed about among relations like unwanted parcels before the Duke took them, and they had learned far too young that the adults in their lives were weather to be endured rather than people to be trusted. Charlotte had set herself quietly and without fuss to teaching them otherwise. Of the Duke himself she had formed the lowest possible opinion, and she had formed it on the first day. He had not come to meet them when they arrived. He had not come the second day, nor the third. The children had been installed in the nursery wing of his enormous house and left there, fed and clothed and utterly unvisited, while their guardian dined out and gamed and rode in the park and conducted his life as though the 2 small grieving people under his roof did not exist. When at last he had appeared, a week in by accident, encountering Charlotte and the girls on the stair, he had looked at his nieces with the blank discomfort of a man inspecting someone else's luggage, said 3 cold words, and gone on his way. Charlotte had despised him from that moment with a clean, settled, entirely private contempt, not because he was cold to her. She expected coldness, and a governess who could not bear to be looked through would not last a month. She despised him because he was cold to them, to 2 children who had done nothing in the world but lose everything, and who needed only the smallest scrap of warmth from the one man bound by blood and duty to give it, and could not get even that. So when the Duke of Wrenmoor, on a Wednesday morning in October, walked into the schoolroom for the first time in 4 months and gave her a smile of such sudden, dazzling, unaccustomed warmth that it quite transformed his cold face, Charlotte Hale did not melt or flutter or blush. She grew extremely suspicious. "Your Grace," she said, rising, the children going still and watchful at her side. "Is something wrong? Has there been some difficulty with my wages or my conduct?" "Wrong? Not in the least." The Duke advanced into the room, and the smile stayed on. And it was a very good smile. Charlotte could see precisely why all of Mayfair was reported to go weak at it. "I find I have been remiss, Miss Hale, shamefully remiss. Here are my brother's children under my roof these 4 months, and I have scarcely troubled to know them, or the woman who has the keeping of them. I mean to mend it. I thought I might sit in on the morning's lessons, if you would permit me." Charlotte regarded him. Every instinct she possessed, and 4 months in his house, and 27 years in a world built for the convenience of such men, had honed those instincts to a fine edge, told her that something was very wrong indeed. Men like the Duke of Wrenmoor did not wake one Wednesday and decide to befriend the governess out of an excess of conscience. They wanted things. And when they were charming about wanting them, they wanted things a woman would do well to refuse before they had finished asking. But he was her employer, and she had 2 children to protect and £40 a year and nowhere else to go. And so she did what women in her position have always done. She said yes with her mouth and reserved her judgment in the one place they could not take from her, behind her clear, gray, watchful eyes. "Of course, Your Grace," said Charlotte Hale. "We are honored. Augusta is just construing her Latin. Perhaps you would care to hear her." And she sat him down, and she watched him, and she waited to find out what he was really after. And she resolved, with a calm that would have terrified Lord Falbridge had he been there to see it, that whatever it was, this cold, beautiful man who could not spare a kind word for 2 orphaned children was going to find the governess a great deal more expensive than he had bargained for. The first day of the wager did not go as the Duke had planned. He had planned, insofar as he had planned anything, to be charming. Charm had never failed him. He had charmed duchesses and opera dancers and hardened dowagers and the occasional bishop. He had a face women admired and a fortune they coveted, and the easy address of a man who has been indulged since birth, and he had assumed, in the careless way of such men, that a country clergyman's daughter earning £40 a year would be the easiest conquest of his career. A few warm smiles, a little flattering attention, the condescension of a great man stooping, which women of her station were meant to find irresistible. By Friday, he had thought, she would be blushing. By Saturday, sighing. By Sunday, Falbridge would owe him 100 guineas, and the whole affair would be a diverting story to tell at the club. Instead, he found himself by 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning, being quietly and comprehensively instructed in Latin grammar in front of 2 solemn little girls, and discovering that he could not construe it. "I am afraid that is not quite right, Your Grace," said Miss Hale, when he had stumbled through a passage of Caesar with the rusty remnants of his Eton schooling. She did not say it unkindly. She said it the way she said it to Augusta, patient, exact, entirely without deference. "Pontem is the object. You have made it the subject. Augusta, can you show his grace where he has gone astray?" And little grave, Augusta, after a frightened glance at her uncle, had shown him, in a small, clear voice with only the faintest stammer, exactly where the Duke of Wrenmoor had gone astray, and the Duke had sat there, a grown man and a peer of the realm, being corrected in his Latin by an 8-year-old, at the direction of a governess who regarded him with the mild, unimpressed patience of a woman watching a large dog learn a small trick. It was, he reflected afterward, possibly the most humbling hour of his adult life. He could not, for the life of him, understand why he had enjoyed it. For he had enjoyed it. That was the thing he turned over riding in the park that afternoon, scowling at the autumn trees. He had gone into the schoolroom to begin a seduction, and had instead spent an hour being made to feel like a backward schoolboy, and some perverse part of him had liked it, had liked her unhurried competence, her refusal to be impressed, the way she had not once in the whole hour performed for him, flattered him, arranged her face or her voice for his benefit as every other woman of his acquaintance did as naturally as breathing. Charlotte Hale had treated him exactly as she would have treated anyone, as a person who might or might not be useful, and who would have to earn, by his conduct, whatever regard he got. No one had treated the Duke of Wrenmoor that way since he was a boy. He found he did not know what to do with it, and he could not stop thinking about it, and that night at the club, when Falbridge asked him with a leer how the campaign progressed, the Duke heard himself say, "Very well," in a tone that did not invite further questions and change the subject, and felt, for the first time, a faint and unfamiliar discomfort about the whole arrangement that he did not care to examine. By the second day, Charlotte had worked out what he was about, or near enough. She had not, of course, been told of the wager. That particular cruelty was still hidden from her, and would do its worst when it surfaced. But she had eyes, and a lifetime's bitter education in the habits of gentlemen, and it did not take her long to recognize the shape of what was happening, the sudden attention, the warmth turned on like a lamp, the visits to the schoolroom, the lingering in doorways, the carefully careless way he arranged to encounter her on the stairs and in the library, and once, with transparent purpose, in the small parlor where she took her solitary tea. A man was courting her. A duke was courting a governess, which meant that a duke wanted from a governess the one thing a duke ever wanted from a woman he could not marry, and Charlotte had seen what became of governesses who supplied it. She had a friend once, Eliza, who had been governess to a baronet's family in Bath, who had been charmed and flattered and ruined and turned out without a character, and had ended in a way Charlotte did not let herself think about too closely. The world was full of Elizas. The world manufactured Elizas deliberately by placing proud, educated, penniless women in the houses of idle, powerful men, and then blaming the women for what the men did. Charlotte had promised herself long ago that she would not be one. She had kept harder promises, so she did not refuse the Duke's attentions because a governess could not refuse her employer without losing her place, and she would not abandon Augusta and Mary to the next hireling the Duke's indifference might inflict on them. But she did not yield to them either. She met his warmth with a courtesy so perfect and so impersonal that it was its own kind of wall. She answered his charm with grammar. She turned every gallant opening he offered back toward the children, the lessons, the work, until the Duke of Wrenmoor found that he could not get within arm's reach of Charlotte Hale, the person, however near he stood to Miss Hale, the governess. And the more she eluded him, the more, to his own considerable alarm, he found he wished to reach her. "You do not like me, Miss Hale," he said, on the second afternoon, when the lessons were done and the children gone to their dinner, and the two of them stood a moment in the schoolroom doorway. He had meant it to come out lightly, charmingly, an invitation to be contradicted. It came out somehow sounding almost like the truth. Charlotte considered the question with the same grave honesty she gave Augusta's Latin. "It is not my place to like or dislike you, Your Grace," she said. "You are my employer. I am sure you are very well liked by a great many people whose opinion is worth more than mine." "That is not an answer." "No," Charlotte agreed, "it is not." And she dropped him a small, perfect curtsy and went to see to the children's dinner, leaving the Duke of Wrenmoor standing in the schoolroom doorway with the baffling sensation of having lost an argument he had not known he was having, to a woman who had not raised her voice, and who had told him precisely nothing, and whom he could not, for the life of him, stop thinking about. The park on the Thursday morning was the Duke's idea, and it was the first wholly good idea he had had in years, though he had it for the wrong reasons. He had proposed an outing, the children, the governess, the open barouche, an hour in the park among the fashionable crowd, because some calculating remnant of the wager still whispered that a woman might be softened by air and sunshine, and the flattering spectacle of being driven about in a duke's carriage where all the world could see. But the children had never been to the park. That was the thing that undid his calculation before the carriage had cleared the square. They had been in London 4 months, and no one had once thought to take them. And when the barouche rolled in through the gates and the great green expanse opened before them, dappled with autumn sun and crowded with riders and walkers and other children bowling hoops along the paths, little Mary made a sound the Duke had never heard from her, a small, astonished, wordless cry of pure delight, and stood straight up in the moving carriage to see, so that Charlotte had to catch her by the sash. "Sit, dearest, sit, you'll tumble out. There, now you may see everything." And Mary sat, gripping the side, her whole small face transfigured, and Augusta leaned out grave and wondering, and the Duke of Wrenmoor watched 2 children discover that the world contained green and space and other children, and felt the last of his calculation curdle into shame, and then, unexpectedly, into something lighter than he had carried in years. He had the carriage stopped. He had not known he was going to. "Would they like to walk?" he asked Charlotte, almost shyly. Is it allowed? Can children walk here?" "Children can walk anywhere there is ground, Your Grace," said Charlotte, with the ghost of something that was not quite a smile. "It is generally only adults who forget how." So they walked. And the Duke of Wrenmoor, who had ridden through this park 10,000 times on fine horses with fine company, looking neither left nor right, walked it that morning at the pace of a 5-year-old, which is to say he stopped every few yards to examine a leaf, a duck, a particularly interesting stone, a dog of low breeding that Mary loved on sight, and that he found himself, to his astonishment, permitting her to pet. He carried Mary on his shoulders when she tired, a duke, with a governess's charge on his shoulders in the park, where the whole of Mayfair might see and did see and whispered. And he found he did not care a straw for the whispering, which was itself a kind of revolution in him. Augusta walked beside Charlotte and unbent by slow degrees into telling the Duke a long and complicated fact about swans that she had read in one of the 2 advanced books he had given her, and the Duke listened to every word as though it were dispatches from the war, and asked questions and got the answers wrong on purpose so that she might correct him and glow with the correcting. Charlotte watched all of this and said little, and revised against her will a number of the settled conclusions she had reached about the Duke of Wrenmoor on the first day. "You are good with her," she admitted, low, as Augusta ran ahead to look at the swans. "I did not expect it. I confess I did not think you had it in you." "Neither did I," said the Duke. He watched the child at the water's edge. "I had a tutor, when I was Augusta's age, who told my father I asked too many questions. My father agreed with him, and the questions were discouraged, firmly." A pause. "I have been remembering it this week, watching you. You never once make them feel that a question is an imposition. I had forgotten that it could be otherwise. I had decided, somewhere, that curiosity was a kind of weakness, like warmth. I am discovering this week that nearly everything I decided about the world, I decided wrongly and at about the age of 9, and have never once revisited." He looked at her. "It is an uncomfortable thing, Miss Hale, to be 37 and learning that you have been a fool since you were a boy. I find I do not entirely hate it. I cannot account for that." And Charlotte, who had braced all week against his charm and found it resistible, discovered that she had no defense prepared against a powerful man confessing, by a duck pond, that he had begun to suspect he had wasted his whole life. And she looked quickly away at the swans, and was annoyed with herself, and could not, for some hours afterward, quite recover the clean, clear contempt that had been so comfortable to hold. It was on the third day that the Duke first saw her with the children, when she did not know he was watching, and it undid something in him that he had thought safely dead. He had come up to the nursery wing in the early evening, meaning to engineer another encounter, and had found the schoolroom door ajar and the lamps lit within, and he had stopped in the dim corridor outside because of what he heard. Little Mary, who had not spoken a full sentence in his hearing in 4 months, whom he had privately assumed to be simple, was talking in a rush, in the high, eager voice of a 5-year-old with a great deal to say, and someone at last who would listen, telling Miss Hale a long, involved story about a dragon and a kitchen cat and a misunderstanding between them, and Miss Hale was answering gravely as though the fate of the cat were a matter of real importance, and Augusta was laughing. Augusta, grave, watchful, frightened Augusta, was laughing without a trace of a stammer. And there by the fire, in the warm lamplight, the 3 of them had made between them the one thing the Duke of Wrenmoor's enormous house had never contained in all his memory of it: a home. A small, warm, ordinary, miraculous home, built out of nothing, by a woman paid £40 a year, in a nursery he had not troubled to visit. He stood in the dark corridor and watched through the gap in the door, and he thought of his own childhood in this same house. The cold father, the absent mother, the procession of indifferent servants, the vast, unloving rooms in which he had learned so young and so thoroughly that warmth was a thing other people had. And he understood, with a force that took the breath from him, that Charlotte Hale was giving his brother's orphaned children the precise thing he himself had never had, and had stopped, decades ago, believing existed. And he had come up here, to this, with a smile on his face and 100 guineas riding on whether he could make the woman who built it sigh over him for sport. The Duke of Wrenmoor went back down the stairs without making his entrance. He did not go to the club that night. He sat alone in his study with a decanter he did not touch, and for the first time in a great many years he was thoroughly, comprehensively ashamed of himself, and he could not even take pleasure in the novelty of the sensation, because it hurt far too much. On the 4th day he stopped trying to win the wager, though he had not yet found the courage to confess it, and began, clumsily, without any clear notion of what he was doing, to try instead to deserve the household he had glimpsed through the door. It was not a thing he knew how to do. He had no practice at it, so he did it badly, in the manner of a man who has only ever been served learning, late and awkwardly to serve. He sent up a rocking horse, extravagant and absurd, that Mary regarded with deep suspicion. He ordered Augusta a set of books too advanced for her by years. He appeared at lessons and tried, haltingly, to be of use, and was mostly in the way. But he came. Day after day he came, and he sat in the small chairs and got the Latin wrong and let Augusta correct him, and slowly, so slowly, the children's wariness of him began, by fractions, to thaw. And Charlotte watched it happen, and did not know what to make of it, for it did not fit. A man bent on seduction did not spend his afternoons on the nursery floor letting a 5-year-old arrange his cravat into a crown. A man playing a part did not look at a stammering child working through a hard passage with that particular expression. She caught it on him more than once and could not name it, and it troubled her sleep. It was not desire. She knew desire. She had been braced against it for 4 months. This was something else, something rawer and more frightened, the look of a man pressing his face to a window from the cold side of the glass. "You are very changed this week, Your Grace," she said to him warily on the 4th evening. The words were almost an accusation. "I do not understand it, and I confess I distrust what I do not understand." The Duke was quiet for a moment. They stood at the schoolroom window. Below them the square lay gray and wet in the dusk, the lamplighter going his rounds. "Miss Hale," he said at last, "may I tell you something, and may you believe against all the evidence of my character that I am telling you the truth?" He did not look at her. He looked down at the lamplighter. "When I was a boy in this house, no one ever once came up to this floor to hear me laugh. I did not know until this week that it was a thing that could be missed. I had thought it was simply how houses were." He turned to her then, and his cold, handsome face was, for once, entirely undefended. "You have made my brother's children a home in 4 months. I, who am bound to them by blood and have all the wealth in England to do it with, could not have made them one in 4 years, because I did not know it could be made. I have been watching you do it, and I find I am no longer entirely sure what kind of man I am, Miss Hale, but I am certain I should like to be a better one than I came up these stairs as. That is all. I do not ask you to believe me. I only ask that you watch, as you watch everything, and judge me by what I do." And Charlotte Hale, who had armored herself against his charm so thoroughly that no smile on earth could have breached it, found that she had no armor at all against this, against honesty, against humility, against a proud man saying plainly that a penniless woman had shown him how to be human. It went straight past every wall she had and lodged somewhere she had thought permanently closed. She did not answer him. She did not trust herself to. But that night, for the first time, Charlotte lay awake not bracing herself against the Duke of Wrenmoor, but wondering about him, which was far more dangerous, and she knew it was far more dangerous, and she could not make herself stop. The library at Wrenmoor House was the finest in the family's possession and the least used, and it was there, on the evening of the 4th day after the children were abed, that the Duke found Charlotte, and they came nearer to one another than either had intended. He had gone there for a book and found her already in it, up the rolling ladder in the lamplight, a volume open in one hand, so absorbed that she had not heard him enter. And the Duke of Wrenmoor stopped in the doorway and looked at his niece's governess perched among 10,000 books with her plain dark hair coming loose and her gray eyes alight with something he had never once surprised on her face in his presence. Joy, plain unguarded joy, the joy of a hungry mind let loose in a feast, and he understood looking at her that he had been starving her all week of the only thing she truly wanted, which was not his attention, and was certainly not his charm, but was simply this: a quiet room and good books, and no one to perform for. "You may use the library whenever you wish," he said, and she startled, and nearly dropped the book, and came down the ladder with as much dignity as a woman caught in unguarded happiness can muster. "Forgive me, Your Grace, the door was open. I should not have presumed—" "You presume nothing. It stands empty else. My father collected these to be admired by visitors, not read. I doubt half of them have ever been opened." He took the volume gently from her hand and looked at it. "Greek. You read Greek." "My father taught me. He said—" She stopped. "Go on." "He said a furnished mind was the one estate that could not be entailed away, nor sold for debt, nor taken by any man." A faint color came into her face. He was a poor man with a great library and a daughter he could not dower, and so he gave me the library instead, which the world has since informed me was an impractical sort of inheritance. A governess has no need of Greek. I have been told so a great many times. By fools, said the Duke. It came out with more force than he intended, and she looked at him, surprised. And he went on, because the thing had been building in him all week, and the quiet lamplit room seemed at last the place for it. I have spent this week, Miss Hale, in the company of a mind better furnished than my own, better than any at my club, better than 9 in 10 of the celebrated men I have wasted my life admiring. And it belongs to a woman the world has decided is worth £40 a year and no respect at all because she had the poor judgment to be born without money. I find it is making me very angry. Not at you, at the arrangement, at a world that took a person like you and a person like me and gave me everything and you nothing and got it precisely backwards and calls the getting it backwards the natural order of things. He set the book down. Your father was not impractical. Your father was the only kind of rich there is. I have 10,000 books I cannot read, and you have read them all in your head already, and we both know which of us is the pauper. Charlotte stood very still in the lamplight. You must not say such things to me, Your Grace, she said, low. Why not if they are true? Because— and for once her composure failed her, just slightly, just at the edges. Because I have spent my whole life being told the opposite, and I have built a way of living that depends upon not minding it, upon being able to bear being valued at £40 and invisible, and you are unbuilding it. With your truths. You do not know what it costs to have learned not to want a thing, and then to have someone tell you that you might have been right to want it all along. It is not a kindness, that. It is very nearly cruel. It would have been kinder to leave me my £40 and my invisibility, for those at least I knew how to survive. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke it was gently and without any charm at all, which was the only way she could not defend against. Then I am sorry, he said, for I cannot leave you invisible. I find I have lost the trick of not seeing you. I have been trying all week, and I cannot manage it for an hour. He stepped back, deliberately giving her room, giving her air. Take the library, Charlotte. Take it as yours. Whatever else comes of this strange week, whatever you decide about the kind of man I am, let there at least be one room in this house where the best mind in it may go and be fed and need perform for no one. I should like to have given you that, even if it is the only thing you ever permit me to give. And he left her there, alone, among the 10,000 books, with the lamp burning and the Greek open on the table, and her composure in a disarray she could not for an hour set right. And Charlotte Hale sat down among the books that were suddenly hers, and pressed her hands to her face, and was angrier with the Duke of Wrenmoor for his kindness than she had ever been for his cruelty, because the cruelty she had known how to fight, and the kindness was undoing her one careful wall at a time, and she no longer had the smallest idea how to stop it. Or, she admitted to herself, alone, in the lamplight for the first time, whether she truly wished to. That night there was a storm, and Mary woke screaming from it, and the household learned a number of things. The thunder came on past midnight, great rolling cracks of it that shook the windows of the nursery wing, and Mary, who had been in the carriage with her parents when the accident took them, on a night exactly such as this, a thing no one had thought to tell the Duke, and that explained a great deal that had puzzled him, woke from a dead sleep into pure terror, shrieking, inconsolable, beyond the reach of any comfort. Charlotte had her in her arms within seconds. She always slept with her door open for exactly this. But the child was past soothing, rigid and wailing, and Augusta had woken too and begun to cry in sympathy and fright, and the storm went on and on. The Duke appeared in the doorway in his shirt-sleeves, a candle in his hand, his dark hair wild, his face stripped of all its careful coldness by sleep and alarm. "What is it? Is she ill? What has happened?" "It is the storm," said Charlotte, over the screaming, rocking the frantic child. "She is frightened. I think "Your Grace, I think it is the storm itself. The night they died, was it?" "It was storming," said the Duke, very quietly. He had gone white. "The road was wet, the horses, yes. It was a night like this." He set down the candle. "Tell me what to do. I do not know what to do. Tell me and I will do it." It was, Charlotte thought afterward, the first time in her life a powerful man had said those words to her. "Tell me what to do, I do not know," and meant them, and the meaning of it cut through even the chaos of the moment. "Sit," she said, "there, by Augusta. She is frightened too, and she is trying to be brave because she thinks she must, and she should not have to, not tonight. Just be with her. Let her not be alone with it." And the Duke of Wrenmoor sat down on the edge of a child's bed in the middle of a thunderstorm and gathered his elder niece against his side, awkwardly, with no practice at all, and Augusta, after one frozen, astonished moment, turned and burrowed into him and held on. And he held on back, and over the top of her head he looked at Charlotte with an expression of such raw, helpless tenderness that she had to look away from it. They got through the night between them. The Duke, casting about for anything, began at last to talk, not to soothe exactly, for he had no gift for it, but simply to fill the dark with a human voice, telling the children, haltingly, true things about their father, his brother, when they were boys in this house, about a tree the two of them had climbed and fallen out of, about a dog their father had loved. Small, ordinary, warm human facts about the parents the children were terrified of forgetting, and had had no one to speak of them to, because the Duke had never once thought to, until tonight, when the storm tore the cold right off him and left only an uncle in his shirt sleeves doing the one thing he had it in him to do, and Mary's screaming gentled into sobbing, and the sobbing into hiccups, and the hiccups, at long last, near dawn, into sleep. Both children asleep at last, Augusta against the Duke's side, and Mary in Charlotte's lap, and the storm muttering away eastward, and gray light coming up at the windows. Neither adult moved, for fear of waking them, so they sat, the two of them, on the floor of the nursery with a sleeping child apiece, and the wreck of the night around them, and they spoke in whispers. And somewhere in those gray, exhausted, whispered hours before the house woke, the last of the wager and the contempt and the careful distance between them quietly died and was not mourned. "You told them about their father," Charlotte whispered. "No one has done that. They have been so afraid of forgetting him, and no one in this house would speak of him. And you, tonight, of all nights." "I did not know I remembered any of it," the Duke whispered back. He looked down at Augusta's sleeping face. "I have spent 20 years not letting myself remember him. It hurt too much. He was the warm one, you see, my brother, and when he died I thought, well, that is the last warmth gone out of the family, and I closed the door on the lot of it, him included." His voice was not quite steady, "and now there are these two, with his eyes, in my house, and a woman who has taught me that the door can be opened again, that it does not in fact kill you to open it, that I have been wrong for 20 years about the single most important thing a man can be wrong about." He looked up at her in the gray light. "I am not telling you this to win anything, Charlotte. There is nothing left to win. You saw through me days ago, and you were right to. I am telling you because there is no one else in the world I could tell it to, and because you alone of everyone I have ever known will not think the less of me for the warmth of it. I have wanted, all week, simply to be in the same room as the only person who would not punish me for feeling things. That is all it ever became after the first stupid day. That is all it is." And Charlotte Hale, on the floor of a nursery in the gray dawn with a sleeping orphan in her lap, found that the wall she had held against this man for 5 days had not been breached or stormed or charmed away, but had simply, quietly, while she was not defending it, ceased to be necessary. And the discovery frightened her more than the storm had frightened Mary, and she held the sleeping child a little closer and did not answer, because the only honest answer was one she was not yet ready to give. If you are listening to this by your own fire tonight, with the lamp low and the day's work behind you and nowhere in the world you need to be, then settle in, for here the story turns. And I should very much like to know where in the world you are listening from, but that is for later. For now, know only that a wager made in cruelty had become by the fourth night something neither party had bargained for, and that the cruelest thing about such wagers is not the making of them, but the moment the person wagered upon finds out. That moment was coming. It came on the fifth day, and it came, as these things do, through the careless malice of someone who thought it a fine joke. Lady Fallbridge called on the fifth morning. She was her husband's match in idleness and his superior in spite, a handsome cold woman who collected other people's humiliations the way some women collect china, and she had heard about the wager from Fallbridge himself, who could no more keep a cruel secret than a sieve keeps water. She had come ostensibly to see the Duke's nieces. The poor little orphans, one hears such things. But in truth she had come to see the governess everyone was talking of, and to enjoy, at close range, the spectacle of a woman who did not yet know she was the subject of a bet at White's. Charlotte received her in the schoolroom, because the Duke was out, and there was no one else to do it, and she knew within a minute that the visit meant her no good. She had met Lady Fallbridges before. The world was full of them, too. "So you are the famous Miss Hale," said Lady Fallbridge, looking her over with bright, unfriendly eyes. "I declare, you are not at all what I pictured. Such a quiet little thing. One would never imagine the trouble you have caused." She let the words hang, watching. Or perhaps not caused. Inspired, shall we say? "You really do not know?" "Oh, my dear, oh, this is too bad of them. I quite thought you must know." "I am sure I do not take your meaning, my lady," said Charlotte, who had begun, with a cold, sinking certainty, to take it precisely. "The wager, child! The whole of Mayfair is laughing over it." Lady Fallbridge's smile was a small, cruel blade. "My husband bet the Duke 100 guineas he could not bring you round in a week, make the cold governess warm to him, soften you, charm you, make you sigh and blush like the rest of them, by Sunday. A week's sport. They wrote it in the book at White's." She tilted her head, drinking in the effect. "5 days he has been at it now. The smiles, the visits, the sudden tender interest in the dear children. You did not think it was real, surely? A duke? With a governess? Oh, you poor creature, you did think it. How perfectly mortifying for you." The schoolroom was very quiet. Charlotte stood with her hands folded at her waist and her face perfectly still, and inside her something was falling, and she did not let it show, because she had 4 months' practice at not letting things show, and 4 years' practice before that, and because little Augusta had gone white and frightened by the window and must not be made more frightened. So Charlotte Hale gathered the falling pieces of herself with a calm that cost her more than Lady Fallbridge would ever know, and she inclined her head, and she said, in a voice without a tremor in it, "How kind of you to take the trouble to tell me, my lady. So few people trouble to be honest with a governess. I am quite in your debt." She crossed to the door and opened it. "You came to see the children, I think. They are at their lessons and not to be disturbed. I will see you out." It was so perfectly composed, so entirely unbroken, that Lady Fallbridge, who had come for the pleasure of watching a woman shatter, found herself, to her great annoyance, shown out of the house by a governess who appeared to be doing her a courtesy, and who had denied her the one thing she had come for, which was the satisfaction of the wound. But the wound was there. Charlotte closed the door behind the dreadful woman and stood with her back against it, and for one moment, one only, she let herself feel the full size of it. 5 days, the smiles, the visits, the halting confession at the window. I should like to be a better man. All of it sport. All of it 100 guineas and a story for the club. She had armored herself so carefully against his charm and let herself be undone, in the end, by his counterfeit sincerity, which was the one weapon she had not thought to guard against because she had not believed a man like that could counterfeit it so well. She had been right about him on the first day. She had let herself be talked out of being right. That was the part she could not forgive, not his sin, but her own lapse, the small, fatal softening that had let her, for 4 nights, lie awake, wondering about a man who was wondering only whether he would win his bet. Then she heard the small, frightened sound from across the room. Augusta stood at the window, her thin shoulders rigid, and the stammer was full upon her, so that she could barely force the words out. Is it true, Miss Hale? Does he not really come to see us? Is it only a game? And Charlotte Hale forgot her own wound entirely. She crossed the room and knelt and gathered the rigid little girl into her arms, and over Augusta's shoulder she saw that Mary too had heard, and was looking at her with those great silent, stricken eyes, and Charlotte understood that the wager had claimed a casualty far worse than her own pride. It had reached the children. It had taught Augusta and Mary all over again the lesson Charlotte had spent 4 months unteaching, that the warmth of adults was weather, false and passing, and that to trust it was to be made a fool. She could survive a broken heart. She had survived worse. But she would not let this man's careless cruelty teach these children to stop believing in kindness. "Listen to me," she said fiercely, holding Augusta back so the child could see her face, so both children could. "Listen, whatever your uncle's reasons were for coming up here, and I do not yet know all of them, and neither do you, the Latin you learned was real. The stories we told were real. The laughing was real. You are real, and you are loved. And that is not a game, and it never was, because I am the one who loves you, and there is no wager in the world that touches me. Do you understand? Adults will disappoint you. Some adults are weak, and some are cruel, and some, I think, are only lost. But you are not fools to love and be loved. You are never fools for that. Do you hear me, both of you?" And Mary, silent Mary, crossed the room and put her arms around Charlotte's neck and whispered against her ear the first words the Duke would later learn she had spoken in his house. "Don't go, Miss Hale, please don't go." "I am not going anywhere," said Charlotte. "I promise you that. Whatever happens with your uncle, I am not going anywhere." It was a promise she meant with her whole heart. It was also, she realized even as she made it, a promise that might no longer be hers to keep, for she did not yet know what she would do about the Duke, but she knew she could not stay in the house of a man who had done this, and she did not see how she could leave it either, and the 2 impossibilities sat in her chest like stones as she held the 2 children in the gathering dark. The Duke came home at 6 to a house that had changed in some way he could not at first identify. It was Mrs. Pruitt, the housekeeper, who told him, a stout, gray, honest woman who had served the family 30 years and disapproved of a great many things in silence and had reached today the end of her silence. She met him in the hall, and she told him that Lady Fallbridge had called, and what Lady Fallbridge had said, and to whom, and in whose hearing, and she told it flatly, without embroidery, and then she looked her master in the eye in a way no servant had looked at him in years. "The little one's been crying since, your grace. That never cries. And Miss Augusta's stammer's that bad she can't get a word out clean. And Miss Hale—" The housekeeper's jaw worked. "Miss Hale has been kindness itself to those babies since the day she came. The only soul in this house has treated them like children and not parcels. Yourself included, if you'll pardon me. And she did not deserve what was done to her today, nor what was done to her. These 5 days neither. I've held my tongue 30 years in this family. I find I'm done holding it. That's all, your grace. I'll see about dinner." And she left him standing in his own hall, a duke dressed down by his housekeeper, with the full magnitude of what he had done settling on him like a cold tide. He did not go up at once. He was afraid to, and the Duke of Wrenmoor had not been afraid of anything in 20 years. He stood in the hall a long while. Then he climbed the stairs to the nursery floor slowly, like a man going to a sentence, and he found the schoolroom door open and the lamps lit, and Charlotte Hale sitting at the table with a child asleep on either side of her, Mary's head in her lap and Augusta tucked under her arm, the 3 of them holding together against the dark exactly as he had watched them do 5 nights before, except that now he knew he was the dark they were holding against. Charlotte looked up at him. Her gray eyes were perfectly steady and perfectly cold, and there was no contempt in them, which was worse than contempt. There was only a vast and quiet disappointment, the look of a woman confirmed in her lowest expectation of a man she had briefly, foolishly allowed herself to doubt. "They are asleep at last," she said quietly, so as not to wake them. It took some time. Augusta was very frightened. She wished to know whether her uncle's affection was a game. I told her I did not know all your reasons. A pause. "Perhaps, Your Grace, you would care to tell me. Since the whole of Mayfair appears to know already, I find I should like to be the last to hear it, rather than, as is customary for governesses, never to be told at all." There was no possible answer that was not contemptible. So the Duke of Wrenmoor did the one thing left to a man who has run entirely out of charm. He told the truth, all of it, plainly, standing in the schoolroom doorway with his hat still in his hand. "Falbridge wagered me 100 guineas, he said, that I could not make you warm to me in a week. I was drunk and stung and vain, and I took the bet. That is why I came up here on Wednesday. That is the whole of why I came up here on Wednesday." He made himself hold her eyes. "And it is not why I came up here on Thursday, or any day after, though I have no way to prove that to you and every reason in the world for you not to believe it. I stopped caring about the wager on the third night when I stood in that corridor and watched you make these children laugh, and understood what you had built here and what I had never had, and what I had come up here to treat as a sporting matter. I have been ashamed every hour since. I meant to confess it to you. I was too great a coward, and I left it too long, and so you heard it instead from that woman, in front of the children, which is the worst way you could possibly have heard it, and that is my fault too, entirely, like all the rest of it." He set down his hat. "I will not insult you by asking your forgiveness. I forfeit the wager. Falbridge shall have his 100 guineas tonight, and the whole club shall know I lost, which is no more than I deserve. I ask only one thing, and not for my sake. Do not leave the children because of what I have done. Punish me however you like, but they have lost enough people. Do not let me be the cause of their losing you." The schoolroom was silent, but for the breathing of the sleeping children. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment, and the Duke could not read what was in her face, and he had the sense, the entirely novel and deeply uncomfortable sense, of a man awaiting a judgment he knew to be just whichever way it fell. "You have told me the truth," she said at last. "I will give you this much. It cost you something, and I do not think you have paid for many things in your life, so I mark that you paid for this." She stroked Mary's sleeping hair. "But you asked me to stay for the children's sake, and that I was always going to do. I promised them so this afternoon before you came home, and my promises are not wagers. They hold. So you have asked me for the one thing I had already given, which costs you nothing, and left unasked the thing that would cost you a great deal." Her gray eyes lifted to his, steady and clear. "If you wish to be the better man you spoke of at this window, Your Grace, you will have to do a great deal more than forfeit a bet and make a pretty confession to a governess after dark. You will have to prove it where it was disproved. You unmade something in public this week. My standing, such as it is, the children's faith, your own honor. A private apology mends none of that, because none of it was broken privately." She rose gently, easing the children down. "I do not want your 100 guineas paid quietly at the club to save your face. I want to see what you are willing to do in the light, in front of the very people you played this game to impress. Do that, and we may speak of forgiveness. Until then, I am the governess, you are my employer, and we will both attend to the children and to nothing else." And she dropped him a small, perfect curtsy, the same curtsy he realized that she had been giving him all week, except that now he understood it for what it had always been, not deference, but its exact opposite, a thing held with both hands and given to no one. The Duke of Wrenmoor bowed to his children's governess lower than he had ever bowed to anyone, and went down to his study to think about how a man proves in daylight what he has only ever felt in the dark. The Duchess of Caredon's ball was the great event of that October, and the whole of fashionable London was to be there, and it was there, on the Saturday night, the 6th day of a 7-day wager, that the Duke of Wrenmoor chose to make his daylight. He did a number of things first that no one saw. He paid Falbridge the 100 guineas in the betting room at White's at noon, in front of as many members as he could contrive to have present. And when Falbridge laughed and asked whether the frosty governess had thawed after all, the Duke said clearly, "No. She saw through me on the first day, as any woman of sense would, and she has held me in the contempt I earned every day since. I have lost. I am glad to have lost. The wager was a contemptible thing, and I was a contemptible man to make it. And I will thank you, Falbridge, not to speak of the lady again in my hearing, for she is worth more than this entire room and everyone in it, myself first of all." And he had walked out, leaving the betting room in an uproar, which was precisely what he intended, for he had learned at last from a governess that a thing unmade in public must be remade in public, and gossip, which had been her enemy all week, could be made to carry the truth as fast as it had carried the cruelty. But that was only the beginning of his daylight. The rest he made at the ball. Charlotte did not know she was to be there. The invitation unto a governess to a duchess's ball, an impossibility, a thing that did not happen in the ordered world of Mayfair, had been delivered that afternoon by Mrs. Pruitt, along with a gown and a card in the Duke's own hand that read only, "You said you wished to see what I would do in the light. Come and see. Bring the children if you will not trust me alone. Bring all of Mayfair. I want witnesses. W." And Charlotte, who had every reason in the world to refuse, and who told herself a dozen times that she would refuse, found that she could not because she had thrown down a challenge and meant every word of it, and a woman who would not show up to see her challenge answered was no better than the man who would not answer it. So she put on the gown, and she left the children with Mrs. Pruitt, and she went. She arrived late and alone, and the great ballroom of Caredon House did exactly what such rooms do when a governess in a borrowed gown walks into them uninvited and unescorted. It turned, and it stared, and it began behind its fans to whisper. Charlotte stood at the top of the steps in the blaze of 1,000 candles, with the whole of fashionable London arrayed below her, waiting to see her shamed, and she did not flinch because she had been stared at by experts, and these were merely the rich. And the Duke of Wrenmoor crossed the entire ballroom to the foot of the steps, in front of everyone, and bowed to her, as a man bows to a queen. "Miss Hale," he said, and he did not lower his voice. He raised it so that it carried to the furthest corner of that enormous glittering room. "You came. Thank you." He straightened. "I have something to say, and I find I should like to say it here, before all these people, because I did you a wrong here, not in this room, but in their world, in their hearing, behind their fans, and I am told, by a wiser person than anyone present, that a wrong done in the light must be mended in the light." He turned then, not to her, but to the room, to the watching, whispering, avid crowd of the people whose good opinion had been the currency of his entire life. And he spoke to all of them. "Most of you have heard," said the Duke of Wrenmoor, "that I made a wager last week that I could make my niece's governess warm to me in 7 days. It is true. I made it. It was the act of a vain and idle man who had never in his life been taught that other people are real. I lost the wager comprehensively on the first morning when Miss Hale took my measure and found me wanting, as she had every right to do, but I lost a great deal more than 100 guineas this week, and I have come here tonight to tell you exactly what, because she is owed a public accounting and I am the man who must pay it." He looked at Charlotte, standing very still at the top of the steps. "I lost the comfortable belief that a person's worth has anything to do with their birth or their fortune. This woman, whom most of you would not trouble to see, has more honor in her than this entire room, and I include myself, and I include every titled person here. She took 2 grieving orphan children that I had neglected for 4 months, my own blood, that I had left in a nursery like luggage, and she gave them a home out of nothing for £40 a year, asking nothing, expecting nothing, because it was right and because she is good. Two things I am only this week learning to recognize. I set out to break her for sport. Instead, she broke me, broke the cold, useless, careless thing I was, and made me wish for the first time in my life to be a man worth her good opinion. I have not earned it yet. I may never earn it, but I will spend as long as she permits me trying, in the light, where you may all watch and hold me to it. The ballroom was utterly silent. 1,000 candles burned, and the Duke of Wrenmoor turned back to the governess at the top of the steps and finished quietly now for her alone, though the silent room heard every word. I do not ask you to forgive me tonight. I ask only that you believe I have meant every word of this and that you let me begin. Will you come down, Miss Hale, and dance with me in front of all of them, so that no soul in London may ever again pretend they do not know exactly what I think of you? And Charlotte Hale stood at the top of the steps of the grandest house in London, with the whole of the fashionable world holding its breath below her, and she understood that she had won. Not the man, not yet. That was a separate question for a quieter hour. But the thing she had truly demanded, which was to be made real in the eyes of the world that had tried to keep her invisible. He had done it. He had stood up in the one room where it cost him everything and made 20 score of the proudest people in England understand that a governess in a borrowed gown was worth more than all of them. She owned the room. She could feel that she owned it. The whole glittering crowd had tilted toward her like flowers toward the sun. Their cruelty curdled into awe, and not one of them would ever again dare to whisper behind a fan when Charlotte Hale walked by. She came down the steps, slowly, gracefully, in no hurry at all, the way she did everything. "I will dance with you, Your Grace," she said, when she reached him, low enough that it was theirs alone. "Once, because you have done a brave and difficult thing, and a just one, and I find, to my very great inconvenience, that I am not made of stone after all." Her clear gray eyes met his. "But understand me, I am not won by a speech, however fine. I was won, if I am won at all, on the 4th afternoon, when you sat on a nursery floor and let a frightened child correct your Latin, and did not mind being small in front of her. That is the man I will consider, not the Duke who can silence a ballroom, the uncle who can be made small by a 5-year-old and counts it a privilege. If you are that man, from this night forward, and not merely tonight, then ask me again in a month, when there is no one watching and nothing to be won, and I will give you an answer that no wager could ever have bought." "In a month," said the Duke of Wrenmoor, "with no one watching." "In a month?" said Charlotte, "with no one watching." And he led her out onto the floor, and the musicians struck up, and the Duke of Wrenmoor danced with his niece's governess in front of all of London, and London, which had come to laugh, found itself, against its will and its every prejudice, beginning quietly to applaud. The day after the ball, before the month of waiting truly began, the Duke did a thing Charlotte did not learn of until much later, and it changed the color of everything that came after. He went to find out who she was, not in the idle way he had first set about it, to win a bet, but in earnest, because a thing she had said at the ball had lodged in him. I was the daughter of a clergyman's scholar, and because a man who has wronged a person badly will sometimes try to make amends in the dark, where no credit can accrue to him, simply to prove to himself that the change in him is real. So he made inquiries. He learned the name of her father's parish, a poor living in a poor county, and the name of the scholar himself, who had been, it transpired, a man of some small reputation among those who cared for Greek, and quite unknown to everyone else, and who had died in debt, leaving a daughter of 20 with a head full of learning, and not a shilling to her name. And the Duke learned one thing more, which Charlotte had never told him, because Charlotte told no one, because it was the wound beneath all her other wounds. There had been a young man, a curate in her father's last years, earnest, poor, fond of her, who had courted Charlotte with her father's blessing and his own honest heart, and to whom she had been, very quietly, engaged. And when her father died, and the debts came due and Charlotte was revealed to the world as a portionless orphan, the curate's family had intervened, as families do, and pointed out that a man with his way to make could not afford a wife who brought nothing but Greek. And the curate, who was weak rather than wicked, had let himself be persuaded and had broken it off in a letter, a kind, cowardly letter full of regret, and had married within the year a brewer's daughter with 3,000 pounds. Charlotte had been 21. She had taken her first governess's place that autumn, and she had decided, somewhere on the long coach ride to that first cold house, that she would never again let herself be in a position where a man's love could be withdrawn the moment it proved inconvenient, that she would build a self that needed no one's choosing, that could not be jilted because it had stopped entirely asking to be chosen. The Duke of Wrenmoor sat with this knowledge a long while, in his study, alone. He understood now things that had baffled him all week, why his charm had not merely failed but seemed actively to insult her, why she met warmth with grammar and tenderness with distance, why she had said on the steps of Caradon House, "Ask me again in a month, when there is nothing to be won," for she had been chosen once, lightly, and discarded the moment the choosing grew costly, and she would not, could not, trust a choosing made in the heat of a grand public moment, with a ballroom watching and a wager fresh in the air. She needed to know that he would still want her when there was no audience, no contest, no flush of drama to carry him, that he would choose her on an ordinary gray Tuesday with nothing to be gained by it, the way the curate had so signally failed to. She was not playing hard to win. She was teaching him, without telling him why, the exact shape of the test he would have to pass, because the last man who mattered had failed the easier version of it and broken something in her she had spent 6 years learning to live without. And the Duke of Wrenmoor, who a fortnight before had regarded women as a diverting species of game, found that he would have given his entire fortune, that night, to go back 6 years and horsewhip a curate he had never met. Since he could not, he did the only thing left to him. He resolved that he would pass the test. Not by grand gestures. She had had the grand gesture at the ball, and it had moved her but not won her. And now he understood why. He would pass it the hard way, the slow way, the way that could not be counterfeited, by coming up the nursery stairs every single day of that month, asking for nothing, performing for no one, until she could see past every reasonable fear that the warmth was real and durable and would not be withdrawn the moment it cost him something. It was, he reflected, the first genuinely unselfish project of his adult life. He found the novelty did not wear off. He found, in fact, that the quiet daily work of becoming a man she could trust was more satisfying than any conquest he had ever made, and he wondered ruefully, alone in his study, how many years he had wasted before stumbling onto the one true secret his whole class spent its life not knowing, that to be of use to people you love is the only pleasure that does not turn to ash, and that he had been rich his whole life and starving and had never once known the name of what he lacked. He told her none of this. He simply began the next morning to climb the stairs, and he kept climbing them every day for a month and asked for nothing, and that, far more than the speech in the ballroom, was the thing that, by slow, gray, ordinary degrees, won him at last the only prize he had ever truly wanted. There was, between the ball and the asking, a month, and the Duke had said it would be a month with no one watching, and he kept his word, but a month is a long time, and not everyone was willing to leave the matter where Charlotte had set it. Lady Falbridge tried once more. She came, uninvited, on a gray afternoon in early November, and this time she did not trouble with the pretense of the children. She came to wound directly, having failed to wound by proxy. She found Charlotte in the small parlor, and she sat down without being asked, and she said with her bright, cold smile, all the things such women keep in reserve, that a duke might amuse himself with a governess but would never, never marry one, that the whole of the ball had been a fit of conscience that would pass, that Charlotte was a fool to hope, and a worse fool to have let herself be made a public spectacle, and that when the Duke came to his senses, as men of his rank always did, she would be turned off without a character, and remembered only as the season's great joke, the governess who fancied herself a duchess. "You should go now," Lady Fallbridge advised, drawing on her gloves, "while you may still go with a little dignity, before he tires of the novelty. I tell you this as a kindness, my dear. No one else will." Charlotte heard her out. She had learned long ago that women like Lady Fallbridge cannot be argued with, because they are not making an argument. They are defending a world, the world that keeps them comfortable, in which birth is worth, and the low stay low, and a clergyman's penniless daughter knows better than to want. And Charlotte had stopped some years since, asking that world's permission for anything. "My lady," she said, when the dreadful woman had run dry, "you have come a long way in the rain to tell me to hope for nothing. I will tell you in return the one thing I have that you do not, and then I will see you out." She folded her hands. "I do not require the Duke to marry me. I never did. I have a profession and my health and 2 children who love me, and a mind my father furnished that no one can unfurnish, and I should be perfectly able to make a life of meaning, whether His Grace ever speaks another word to me or not. That is what you have never understood about women like me, my lady, and it is why you came here in the rain to frighten me and will leave having failed. You think I am hoping. I am not hoping. I am deciding. There is all the difference in the world between a woman who waits, trembling, to see whether a man will choose her, and a woman who is making up her own mind, in her own time, whether she will choose him. I am the second kind. I have always been the second kind. You cannot frighten the second kind, because we are not standing where you are aiming." She rose and opened the door. "The Duke must earn me, my lady, not the other way about. I am sorry no one ever told you that you might have required the same. It is rather too late for you now, I think. Good afternoon." And Lady Fallbridge, who had swept into grander rooms than this and never once been dismissed from any of them, found herself, for the second time, walked out of the house by the governess, and this time she did not even have the satisfaction of believing she had landed a blow, for there had been nothing in Charlotte's face to land it on. She went out into the rain baffled and diminished, and she did not call again. Charlotte shut the door and leaned against it a moment, and then she went back up to the schoolroom where the Duke was, at that hour, on the floor with Mary and a regiment of wooden soldiers, getting the battle deliberately wrong so that the 5-year-old might win it. And she stood in the doorway unseen for a moment and watched him, this difficult, proud, transformed man, lose a war to a child on purpose, and she thought, yes, in 3 weeks more, when he asks, as I think he will, yes. But she said nothing of it to anyone, and kept it where she kept everything that mattered, behind her clear, gray, watchful eyes, to be given in her own time, by her own decision, to no one's schedule but her own. There was an afternoon, midway through the month of waiting, that neither of them ever spoke of afterward, because some things are too important to be made into anecdotes. The Duke had taken to reading to the children in the evenings, badly at first, in the stiff, declamatory manner of a man who has never read aloud to anyone, and then, under Charlotte's quiet coaching, less badly, until he discovered the trick of it, which is simply to care more about the listener than about one's own dignity. And on this particular afternoon, a wet one, with the children settled on the hearthrug, and Charlotte mending by the window, he had been reading them a tale of a night and a long quest, and he had come, unprepared, to a passage in which the knight returns at last to a home he had thought lost forever, and finds it waiting, and is taken in. And the Duke of Wrenmoor, reading aloud to 2 orphans in a nursery, had found his voice closing up entirely, and had had to stop, and could not for a moment go on. The children looked up at him, alarmed. Charlotte looked up from her mending. "Forgive me," said the Duke, low, mastering himself. "It is only—" He looked at the page, and then at the 2 upturned faces, and then, helplessly, at Charlotte. "It is only that I did not know until quite recently that a person could come home. I had thought it was a thing that happened in stories. I find the stories affect me more than I expected. now that I know they are, that they can be." He stopped again, and little Mary, who understood more than anyone gave her credit for, climbed off the hearthrug and came and leaned against his knee and said, with the grave certainty of the very young, "You can come home, Uncle. You live here. This is your home." The Duke of Wrenmoor put his hand on the child's head and could not speak at all. Charlotte set down her mending. She crossed the room and she did a thing she had not done in all the weeks of their acquaintance, a thing she had been holding back as one holds back the last coin. She rested her hand, lightly, briefly, on the Duke's shoulder. The first time she had touched him by her own choice, freely, with no compulsion of duty in it anywhere, and she said gently, so that the children might hear, for the children most of all needed to hear it, "She is right, you know. It is your home. It always was. You only forgot for a while what a home is for. A great many people forget. The remembering is the whole of the thing. You are remembering rather well, I think, all things considered." And the Duke reached up and laid his hand over hers, where it rested on his shoulder, and for a moment the two of them stayed so, joined by that small grave touch, with one child against his knee and the other watching wide-eyed from the rug, and the rain at the window and the half-read story open in his lap. And Charlotte understood in that moment that she had already decided that the deciding was done, had been done for some while, and that all that remained was to wait out the month she had set, not because she still doubted him, she no longer doubted him, but because she had told the children that adults must prove themselves over time and not merely in fine moments, and she would not teach them a lesson with her words that she untaught with her conduct. The month was no longer a test of the Duke. It had become a promise to the children that love in their new country would be the slow, reliable, durable kind, and not the kind that arrives in a thunderclap and departs as fast. So she took her hand gently back and returned to her mending, and the Duke cleared his throat and found his voice and read on to the end of the chapter, where the knight came home, and not one of the 4 people in that warm, lamplit room said anything further about it, then or ever, because they were by then far past the need to. But that night, when the children were abed, Charlotte sat alone in her small room and took out a thing she had not looked at in years. The cowardly kind letter, 6 years old now, soft at the creases by which a curate had once explained why he could not afford to love her. And she read it through one last time, and then she rose, and crossed to her small fire, and fed the letter to it, and watched it burn. She had carried it 6 years as a kind of armor, a reminder never to want, never to hope, never to be in a position to be discarded again. She found she no longer required the armor. She found, watching it curl and blacken, that she had stopped, somewhere in this strange month, being a woman who guarded against being chosen, and had become again, for the first time since she was 21, a woman who might freely choose. And the difference, she thought, watching the last of the old wound go up the chimney in sparks, was the whole of what the Duke of Wrenmoor had given her, though he would never know he had given it, and she would never quite find the words to tell him. He had not won her. He had done something far rarer and far harder. He had made her once more winnable on her own terms by undoing 6 years of careful, necessary, lonely armor. And a man who can do that for a woman, she thought, climbing at last into bed, is a man worth coming down a flight of steps for in a month when no one at all is watching. He asked her in a month with no one watching. It was November by then and cold, and the asking happened not in a ballroom but in the schoolroom, in the early evening, with Augusta construing her Latin at the table, and Mary building a fortress of blocks on the hearthrug, and the Duke, who had come up to the nursery floor every single day of that month, not once missing, and had learned to construe Caesar correctly, and had heard Mary speak and Augusta laugh without a stammer, and had wept about it privately in a way he told no one but Charlotte, set down the book he was not reading and said simply, "It has been a month. No one is watching but the children, and they have watched me become, I hope, a man you might consider. I am asking Charlotte, not the Duke, the uncle who can be made small. Will you have him?" and Charlotte Hale looked across the warm lamplit schoolroom at the man who had set out to break her in a week, and had instead spent a month proving, in daylight and dark alike, that he had been broken open into something better. And she looked at Augusta, who had stopped pretending to construe and was watching with her heart in her eyes, and at Mary, who had abandoned the fortress entirely and was holding her breath. And she understood that the question was not really being asked of her alone, but of all four of them, because somewhere in that strange month the four of them had quietly become the thing the great cold house had never held. "Yes," she said, "I will have him." And little Mary, who a season before had not spoken at all, shouted, "Yes!" so loudly that she startled herself, and Augusta burst into tears and then into laughter, and the Duke of Wrenmoor crossed the schoolroom and went down on the floor among the children where he had learned to belong, and gathered the whole improbable family of them into his arms at once. He had wagered in October that he could break a governess in a week. By the following spring she was his duchess, and she owned not merely every room in London, but the one room in all the world he had never been able to fill, which was the cold house of his own heart. And he counted the 100 guineas he had lost to Lord Falbridge the best investment of his entire life, for it had cost him his pride and bought him a soul, and that, as his wife liked to remind him when he grew too pleased with himself, was a rate of exchange no gentleman in his right mind would ever refuse. So bank your fire, and turn down your lamp, and let the candle gutter low. The cold, proud man was humbled, and the woman the world overlooked was seen at last and chosen in full daylight, and 2 motherless children got, in the end, the home that every child is owed. And somewhere tonight, by some other fire, in some house I shall never see, you have kept them all company to the end of it, and I am glad of it. And I hope you will tell me where in the world you have been listening from. Sleep well. There will be another fire and another story when next the candles are lit.